Welcome to the Reach College Podcast with your speaker, Pastor AJ.
But sometimes we tell ourselves that we're going to experience God so much more, even though it's my job to protect them and watch over them. Sometimes I let them fail. So my name's AJ. I'm the student pastor. I had maybe half of you in the youth group at some point, I think. So that's cool. But I'm glad to be talking to you guys. And a lot of what I want to talk to you about is a little bit of my own experience and a lot of bit about God. So if you will, open your Bibles to Psalm 121. That's where we're going to be this morning. And I titled this lesson this morning, Take a Deep Breath. Because I never want to assume that I know the room and I know where everyone is, but I think it's easy to probably assume that we're all in some sort of season. I don't know what that looks like, whether it's figuring out your career or figuring out future spouse, future family. There's something that you might be waiting for. We've all been there. And when Taylor asked me to lead this group, I was like, oh yeah, it's the college young adult group. And I remember my early years of coming out of being a teenager and walking into adulthood. It was pretty brutal, just to be honest with you. It was pretty brutal and it was difficult. And I was somebody coming out of high school, fresh on a call to ministry. And so when I graduated, I had just received kind of that call to ministry on my life from the Lord at summer camp, graduated and then went into college, and which I'm still in, by the way. So that's kind of a little bit about my story. Is I started off at ORU, and I went there for a semester. I had no community at all. I had really no support outside of my mama because all of my friends went to other colleges or state schools, whatever. And so I kind of felt on an island. And then going to ORU, I was a commuter. Any commuters in here? You commute to college? Anybody? No, they're all there. Okay, you got one. There you go. I still commute. No, I'm just kidding. I still commute. No, online. But anyway, so college was rough. So I left ORU and I jumped into TCC. And I did that for a few semesters, and then I threw my hands up and I said, I'm going to do the school thing later. And now I'm 33, and I'm just now graduating with my psychology degree this summer. And so it's it only took me, 15 years to finish my college degree. But that's a reminder to you that it doesn't matter how we get to the end of a season. What matters is that we trust the Lord on the journey. And that's what I want to encourage you with, because I know many of you are probably looking toward a season to end or looking toward finding an answered prayer or whatever that might be, figuring out your career or something like that. And if that's the case, I want to encourage you not to just focus so much on the end, but that it's okay to spend time in that journey. And so taking a deep breath. The reason I said that is because in those early stages, college and even a couple years after college, it was just stressful. And I remember always panicking and wanting to be done with this season and then done with this season and then done with this season. But the thing is that seasons are always there. As soon as you get out of one season, you're in the next one. And so we always want to look at a finish line. But the truth is that the finish line comes when we stand in the presence of God at the end of our lives, because we are human and we live in a broken world. So there's always going to be that tough season. Not that there's not sweet moments, but there's always going to be something we're striving toward. And so sometimes it's a good reminder that we just need to take a deep breath and we just need to be okay where we are. And that's not to say that we can't have goals, and that's not to say that we can't be praying through whatever it is we're asking God to reveal to us, whether it's a career option or a career that you want to pursue, or you're looking for your future spouse, or whatever that looks like for you. It's not to say that you can't look forward to those things, but it's a reminder that, hey, even when I'm looking forward to this, it's okay sometimes to just take a deep breath and rest in the presence of God. So that's what I want to encourage you guys with this morning through Psalm 121. And so it's only 8 versus long. And something I try to do a lot when I teach is I try to give questions that you can just ponder, questions that you can think about. So as we go through this, by asking you questions about your personal life, and I want to ask you to share out loud, but as you ponder questions about your own personal life, then as we unpack some of this, you can begin to think, how does this apply to my current situation? So a little bit of context of this psalm specifically. Psalm 121 is a psalm of ascent, meaning a song sung by travelers. Another word for ascent is to travel upward. This is a psalm that is sung when on a journey. So that's a reminder that many of us in this season of life as a young adult, maybe probably not married. I assume many of us are not married. Okay. Then you're on a journey of figuring out what that future looks like. And some of us may be called to never be married, and that's okay as well. But whatever road we're on a journey. So I want you to get personal for a moment with the Lord. You can write it in your Bible, write it in your journal, write it on your phone, just think it in your mind, however you want to do it. But I want to encourage you to take it serious when I ask you these questions. So here's the first question. What's the journey that you're on right now? And I know that can seem like a very broad question, but I'll give you an example. So when I was a freshman in college, I would have answered that question figuring out what ministry looks like. How do I get myself into ministry? When I was 23, I may have said figuring out what being married looks like, as my now wife and I were engaged for a year and a half. And so I had a year and a half to prepare myself, like I wasn't before, right? But I had a year and a half to really prepare myself for that marriage. So like every season, you kind of know how to describe your own journey. So I want you to think for a moment. I'm really going to give you guys a few seconds to think about it. How would you describe your journey? Think about that for a second. How would you describe your journey? What are things going on in your life? What are goals you have set? What are things you're working toward? What are answers you're seeking from God? So while you're thinking of yours, I'll tell you mine. I have come back to a journey that I used to be on, and I said it just a little bit ago. Mine is school. That's the journey that is kind of always in the back of my mind, like something that I'm working toward. And so I've been back in school now for 2 years, and I'm finally almost done. Is anybody else, who all is in school? Just the two of us? Okay, how many of you guys have graduated college? Okay, good for you, man, because that's hard. I'm just saying, like, I'm 33 just now doing it. But I'll tell you, the Lord was so good to me as I walked away from college and decided to pursue a career without an education. The Lord was so good to be present in my life and to put me in such a place as He did to serve Him even without an education. Because education, as we know, is not everything, right? So whether you're in school or not in school, or whether you're just pursuing the workplace, or maybe you're like, dude, I'm just trying to figure it out. That's okay. Let me tell you that. That's okay. That's why I'm 33, just now finishing my college degree. And that's okay. Like, I don't feel bad for that. I felt bad for like a minute when I was like, I think I need to go back to school. But let me share something with you. The only reason that I chose to go back to school is because I felt like me pursuing my education was going to make me a better pastor. And so I actually didn't even need education to keep my job or to pursue a career that I didn't currently have. Like, the Lord was so good to me to provide an opportunity for me to be able to pursue my career without an education. But in that, I realized to be the pastor that God would call me to be, that He was calling me to pursue education. So I want to encourage you, even if you're in that season of like, do I do college? Do I not do college? Like, what do I do? Do I just pursue the workforce? Like, whatever you do, God's going to be present in your life if you abide in Him. Okay? So your identity is not found in your career. Your identity is not found in a degree. Your identity is not found in a relationship. Your identity is not found in these worldly things. Your identity has to be found in one thing, and that is Christ, right? It's got to be. And when it is, then Psalm 121 really comes alive. It really comes alive in our life. So let's unpack that a little bit. Psalm 121, I'm going to read verses 1 and 2. It says this, I lift my eyes toward the mountains. Where will my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. I'm going to share something kind of embarrassing with you. So as I said, I graduated high school and I wanted to be in, I knew I had a call to ministry in my life. And I wanted to be in ministry so bad that I tried to do it without God. And I know you're like, how do you even do that? Like, how do you pursue ministry without God being a part of that? And I'll be honest with you, it's just by making decisions that were knee-jerk decisions and running through any door, whether opened or closed, and not at all bringing God along in my decision making. And so I want to encourage you to take a deep breath. And as you are, whatever journey you're in, and as you are beginning to make decisions and pursue different things in your life, I want to remind you that the Lord is present. And sometimes we forget that he's present in our lives, and so we make these decisions on our own. That's what I did in those first few years out of high school, is I started to make decisions on my own without letting God be a part of it. Because for some silly reason, I just forgot that God was present in my life. I felt like I needed to get to the end of that journey, and then God would begin to move. I needed to get to that end of that journey, and then like my quiet times would be so much better, right? Like then like I would just feel God so alive in my life, but not until I get there. And that's such a lie from the enemy. It is such a lie from the enemy, because the truth is regardless of what season you're in, what journey you're on, and what you're going through right now, God is present. And your walk with him can be so sweet regardless of the external journey that you're on. Okay, so again, I lift my eyes toward the mountains. Where does my help come from? The psalmist could be both literal, here talking about, as we said, this is what we call a psalm of ascent. And so very much so, as this is a psalm that could be sang, if you will. It's written as a song. And so this could be a song that is sang on a journey, on a physical journey, actually looking up at the hills, actually looking at the finish line, reminding themselves that God created this very thing that they travel to. That's very, very possible in why the psalm was written. But at the same time, the psalmist understood that the group did not need to get to the end of the finish line to know that God was present. Like God wasn't just the protector at the top of the mountain. God wasn't the protector once they've ascended. But that this is what I want you to remember, and you can write this down. God is just as present in the journey as he is in the destination. Okay? God is just as present in the journey as he is in the destination. But we fool ourselves, because when we're asking God to reveal things in our lives, like, Lord, bring me a spouse, or Lord, open this job opportunity, or Lord, give me that promotion, or whatever that is. Again, we're all on different journeys. But sometimes we tell ourselves that we're going to experience God so much more once we find that answer, once we reach that destination. And again, that's just a silly lie from the enemy, because he's present right now. It says, my help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. And so I want you to understand that God is in control and is the maker of all things, meaning whatever journey you're on, whatever season of life you're in, you were placed there on purpose. Your circumstances that you're in, you're placed there on purpose. And God is still present even in this season. So don't forget it. Let's go to the next two verses 3 and 4. It says this, he will not allow your foot to slip. Your protector will not slumber. Indeed, the protector of Israel does not slumber or sleep. So here's the next thing I want you to see. The Lord brings help. The Lord brings help. And I'm sure many of us, as we are in these journeys, especially the more difficult journeys, we are telling the Lord how much help we need, right? Have any of you ever found yourself there where you're like, God, I need you to intervene? Yes, come on now. I love to hear it. I love the honesty. Man, I found myself in this place. I believe I was 20 years old. So I'd been through a few semesters of college, and I was not enjoying college at all. And I kept just jumping from opportunity to opportunity, whether it was ministry or it was a career opportunity, whatever. And so here's where I was. So I was working at a pharmacy that no longer exists called Drug Warehouse. And I had worked there since I was about 16 years old in high school. So I'm 20, I'm still working at Drug Warehouse. And I'm trying to force myself into ministry. I went to one church that was Free Will Baptist. Nothing against Free Will Baptist. It just didn't align with my own theology. But in that moment, I didn't care about that. I was just looking for an opportunity to do ministry. So I jumped on the first door that was open. So I went and tried to do like music there, and it just was very uncomfortable. I had no community. It was a bad place for me to be. And I did not at all seek the Lord in going there. I just went. So I was there for a few months, and I jumped out of that. Then I went to a church here in town where they were paying me $50 a week to show up on Wednesday nights and help them create a youth band. Well, here's the interesting part about that. All the kids in the band, none of them knew how to play an instrument. So I had a bunch of kids show up. We had instruments, but none of them knew how to play instruments. So some of you know me. I play guitar, I sing, I can lead worship a little bit. But like, I don't know how to play piano. I can barely play the drums. I got like one beat. Like, that's it. Like, give me like a 4/4 and we're good. Anything beyond that, if you want a halftime, I'm out, right? So, I barely know how to play bass. Key of G, I'm good. Anything else, I'm out. And so they wanted me to create this youth band with youth and with instruments, but not youth that played instruments. And even those who did know how to play instruments were not walking with the Lord at all, like in their lives. And so, so I can remember I went to go visit my mom on a Wednesday night before I was heading to the church. And I left the church, or I left my mom's house. I got in my car. It was a 1987 Buick Park Avenue. Like, I don't think they make those anymore. They're super old and big, clunky boats. Okay, this thing was a hoopty. Okay, so I get in this vehicle. I'm thankful it turned on. Like, every time I turned the key, I prayed it would start. And so I turn it on, and I'm getting ready to pull out of my mom's neighborhood, and I just stopped and I just cried. Like, moment of transparency. I just cried. And I said, Lord, if this is what ministry is, I want out. So I told him, I said, I don't want to do this. This sucks. Like, that's what I told God. And I began to ask him to intervene. Well, he was so good to bring me a great opportunity. He brought me out of that church. He gave me a good segue, if you will, out of the church. And as just as faithful as he was to bring me out of that, like I asked him to, I got out of that and I quickly went back to my own ways. Have you ever done that? Has God ever answered a prayer and you're like, thanks for doing that. All right, I'll let you know next time I need you, and we go do our own thing again, right? We do that all the time. So I literally did that. Like, I'm an idiot, okay? Like, I remember thinking back on that season, and I can't believe I was so prideful to think that, okay, I just need God here. I don't need him everywhere. And so I found myself just a few months later, I left that pharmacy Drug Warehouse and I went literally across the street. If you go 21st and 31st and Garnett, there's a Walgreens on the corner of 31st and Garnett, and right across the street used to be where Drug Warehouse is. I told Drug Warehouse I was going across the street to Walgreens because they were going to train me to be a tech. That's just words you don't need to know. But they were going to train me for a different position and pay me more money. And the place I was at wasn't going to do that. And they were like, okay, we understand, we love you, go for it. And so I left. I was there for 2 days. I'm not kidding, okay? And there's circumstances why this happened, too long for me to try to explain. But I was there for 2 days at Walgreens. And I went back to my place after work, got home, changed, sat on the edge of my bed, and once again, for the second time as a young adult, began to just weep, just cry. I was so sad in my journey. I was so sad where I was because time after time, I was forgetting that the Lord was present and I was only giving him control when I needed help. But the truth is that God wants to give us a firm foundation at all times. That's not saying that he's always going to give us the answers that we want in every moment of life. But that is to say that he can give us a firm foundation in our walks with him, that as we go through these journeys, we don't find ourselves in these seasons of sorrow, but maybe it's just okay, Lord, I don't know what's going to happen, but I trust you because we've been abiding in him. And that's not what I was doing. I was not abiding in the Lord. I was not seeking him in all my ways. Instead, I was trying to do things my own way. And so verses 3 and 4 says again, he will not allow your foot to slip. Your protector will not slumber. And I would forget that God wants to give me a firm foundation, and instead I would want to do things on my own. So here's a question I want you to think about. Do you recognize the firm foundation God has presented to you? Do you recognize the firm foundation God has presented to you? I'm going to say it one more time, and I'm going to give you my own example. Do you recognize the firm foundation God has presented to you? So like I said, once again, I'm there and I'm weeping. And I remember calling my girlfriend in college, who is now my wife, and telling her just like, I'm so unhappy in my season of life. And now you'll know when I say this why I married the woman, okay? She said, why don't you stop doing things your way? And why don't you just trust where God has placed you and let him have control? And that was like a smack to the face that I absolutely needed. She said, quit trying to run through every door, open or closed. Quit trying to get to the finish line before God's ready for you to be there. But instead, she's like, you're 20. Just be a college student. Just like surround yourself with community. Walk with Jesus and trust that he's going to place you where he wants you. Such a great, great word of advice. And so I took it. And so I decided I was going to go. My home church did not have very much of a community for me, even though that's where I was attending. And so I knew I needed some community. So even though I had a church home and there was hardly anyone my age there, I knew I needed some sort of a community. And so I began to go to BCM. Any BCMer goers in here? You went or you currently go to BCM? Anybody? No? One, two of us? Okay. I feel you. So BCM was big for me because my home church did not have a young adult ministry or a college ministry at all. And so I went to BCM, and within months, my BCM director was pouring into my life like one-on-one discipleship. It was the first time ever in my life. And if you know me, you know like discipleship's my thing. Okay. I love it. But that was the first moment I experienced discipleship in my life, was by letting go and just letting God be in control. And so my firm foundation that the Lord wanted me to be in that season for me, was my BCM, was to surround myself with like-minded believers, also people going through the very thing I was going through, whether in college or not, because if you've been to BCM, not all of them are actually in college. And so I met some of my best friends at BCM. I got discipled by my BCM director. And then I began to be able to lead worship at BCM. And so even though God was calling me to ministry, and I'm thinking, give me a job at a church, right? Like, give me the retirement and give me the all this stuff. Like, I wanted the finish line. And God was like, no, I'm calling you to ministry. And right now, the ministry I'm calling you to is to pick up your guitar and lead worship for college students. And I had to be okay with that. I had to humble myself and lay down my pride. And I had to be okay with that in my journey in this moment. This is where God has me. And so that's where I settled. I had a church home that I'd go to on Sunday mornings. I had my community that I'd spend time with on Thursday nights. So what is your firm foundation? It's got to be number one, your walk with the Lord. Your walk with the Lord is where your firm foundation really begins and ends. But within that, within your walk with the Lord, has God presented you with people that you can have community with? Has God presented maybe someone in your life that has been able to invest in your life and disciple you? Hopefully that is the case. And then the next thing that we see, it says, he will not allow your foot to slip. In other words, he gives you a foundation. And then your protector, so he protects. God watches over you. And how many times do we forget that God watches over us? I would always feel like in the ends of those moments, like, God, where are you? Why have you forsaken me? Why have you allowed me to be in this place? But then when I would look back, I'd go, oh, wait a minute. You were there and I ran the opposite direction. We've got to remind ourselves that whatever season we're in, God's present. And not only is he present, but he's watching over you. He is here to protect us. He is our protector. And then we're reminded time after time here that the protector of Israel does not slumber or sleep. It says that again, the Lord protects you. The Lord is a shelter right by your side. So when he says keeps you or protects you, it's actually a Hebrew word shamar, and it's translated keeps or preserves. So what does it look like for the Lord to preserve us? For me, I think of my season, the Lord preserved my call to ministry. Because after heartache and ugly season after ugly season, I wanted to throw my hands up. I told you, I even told the Lord at one point, if this is ministry, I want out. But the Lord was so faithful to preserve that call in my life and to show me, listen, when you trust me, I know the desires of your heart, as the Bible tells us, and I'm going to bring them to you, and they're going to be so sweet. But we have to do it with him. We have to let him be our protector, be our foundation, be the one that preserves our hearts and our callings. And so that's exactly what he did in my own life. Now, when I think of like the Lord being a protector and watching over us at all times, I've kind of come into a new season in my life where as a dad, I've begun to understand this a little bit more as a parent, where, like, for instance, my wife and I, we have 2 monitors next to her side of the bed for both of our boys. We have a 4-year-old and a 1.5-year-old. And we have those monitors to watch over them, right? To watch them sleep. But this says that our protector does not slumber or sleep. Let me give you an example here. My wife and I just went through a really, really difficult, 2 weeks. If you follow me on social media, you know what I'm talking about. To try to make a really long story short, my youngest, while I was on mission trip in New Orleans, my youngest was at the gathering place with my wife and my 4-year-old and my sister-in-law, and my 1.5-year-old caught a fever out of nowhere, and it spiked so quickly he had what they call a febrile seizure. Well, we didn't know what those were at all. We'd never heard of them. All my wife knows is she's at the park with our boys and that our 1-year-old begins seizing. And here, so real quick, he's okay. A febrile seizure is not as dramatic as it sounds. Yes, a seizure is super scary in the moment. We called IMSA. Actually, God was so cool because right in that moment, my wife and my sister-in-law began to yell, "Is there a doctor?" And standing right next to them was an ER doctor playing with his children. And he literally turns around and picks up Austin and gets him through the episode and holds him until IMSA got there. So God was just so evident in that, and God is so cool. But here's my thinking is that for the next week, we just wanted to watch him like hawks. We wanted to take his temperature every hour, making sure it wasn't getting high. Even though the doctors were with a febrile seizure, the chances of him having another seizure is slim to none. That's not how it works. But that's not what our minds told us, right? Because we're just panicking. We're if it happens once, maybe it could happen again. And so we're taking his temperature every hour. I'm setting my alarm on my watch to wake me up every 2 hours to go check his temperature because I am called as his father to be his protector. But I'll tell you what, even I have to sleep. And it was a humbling season for my wife and I to recognize, number one, we can't take care of our children unless we get rest ourselves. But even though we have those monitors next to us, there's going to be moments where we cannot be there. There's going to be moments where we got to trust our children to the Lord. And I'll tell you what, guys, when you become parents, if and when you become parents, you're going to understand that. You're going to understand that. It's so hard. But the cool thing about God doesn't sleep. God literally watches us 100% of the time. And that should bring a peace in our lives that does surpass all understanding. That should bring a peace that gives us rest even in the ugliest of journeys, in the ugliest of seasons where we don't know how this thing is going to end. But knowing that our God is 100% of the time on call, on duty, watching us, being our protector, it's got to bring us peace. So let me ask you this question. Think about it. Write it down if you want. What things can you do in your life to recognize that God is always there? I know I keep harping on that, but we forget it. I think that's why the psalmist says it over and over again, that he's there. He's a firm foundation. He's protector. He does not sleep. But what are some things in our life we can do to remind ourselves, even in this ugly moment, God is there? In those moments where I would find myself weeping in that season of life, I remember that God is there. Now listen, James 1:2-4 says this. Consider it a great joy, my brothers, whenever you experience various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. But endurance must do its complete work so that you may be mature and complete, lacking nothing. Again, that's James 1:2-4. And again, I can't help but use my own season of life as the example, but I think of my boys. Even though it's my job to protect them and watch over them, sometimes I let them fail. And sometimes it's hilarious, but that's not why I do it. Sometimes I just got to let them figure it out, right? And so maybe I've told Armando, my older one, stop jumping on the couch, right? Like stop trying to flip over, quit doing that. You're going to hurt yourself. And eventually I'm going to see him doing it. I'm going to see him doing his own thing. And I'm going to go, all right, bud. And I'm just watching him. And I'm like, this is going to hurt. And he does one of those stupid things where he falls and he hits his head or like whatever happens. Now listen, I'm not going to let my kid get like injured, okay? But sometimes I got to let him learn his lesson. And so sometimes he'll fall and he'll get hurt. And he'll come over and he's crying and I'm there. Daddy's there, arms open. I'll pick him up, I'll hold him, I'll say, now listen, let us learn from this. Why does daddy not want you to jump on the couch? And he'll tell me why. And I'll go, what are you going to do next time? And he'll say, no, jump on the couch. He's crying. I'm like, okay. Now, that's not to say that God just lets bad things happen to us. But here's the deal. I already told Armando not to do it multiple times. There were even times where I'd go over and I'd swoop him up and I'd say, stop it. And there's times that God will reveal to us, hey, don't do this. And there's times that God's even going to knock us out of that because he's protecting us. But at some point, when we continue to do things our ways and forget that he is right there, sometimes we're going to have to go through trials. And that's okay. Going through a trial does not equate God's absence. Okay? Us going through a trial does not mean that God's not there. It simply means that God is allowing us to go through this season to experience travels. And again, as James 1 tells us, that will produce endurance. So sometimes those trials are to produce endurance and so we can fight through those hard things. Sometimes those trials, like with Armando, is to learn, okay, I don't want to do that again, right? I tried doing that and that was not the right way and I don't want to do that again. But those trials can be good things in our life. But it doesn't mean that God's not there. And then again, endurance must do its complete work so that you may be mature and complete, lacking nothing. Sometimes those trials are to make us who God wants us to be. And I'll tell you what, I don't believe that God placed me in those early areas of ministry to teach me. I think I put myself there by not listening to him or trusting him. But I do believe that even though I put myself there, that God then used my own bad decisions to teach me. And now I am where I am today, and I'm the pastor I am today, some of which because of the things I learned in those really difficult seasons. And so I promise you, wherever you are right now, if you're going through a hard time, if you're going through a hard trial, if you're going through an ugly journey, or you're just frustrated because the answers just aren't coming yet, I'm telling you that you're going to get to the other side and you're going to go, okay, Lord, I've got a testimony now. Like I've got some wisdom I get to share with somebody. Or Lord, I know how to trust you better. Or Lord, I know how to run to you quicker. It's going to make us who God wants us to be. Verses 5 and 6 tells us the Lord brings protection and relief. The Lord brings protection and relief. Here's what it says. The Lord protects you. The Lord is a shelter right by your side. The sun will not strike you by day or moon by night. So as the psalmist ascends or travels or goes through his journey, the sun is beating down on him. And he knows that even though there are circumstances outside of his control, that God is still watching over him and providing him relief. So again, we've kind of harped a lot on those circumstances that we sometimes put ourselves in, right? But listen, there's going to be moments, there's going to be times where there are circumstances in our lives that are just out of our control. So let me ask you this question. What circumstances in your current journey, talking about your current journey, what circumstances are completely out of your control? Think about it, write it down, ponder it. What circumstances are completely out of your control? So again, I said I'm in school right now and I want to be done super, super fast. I'll graduate with my psychology degree in August. And then I'm currently enrolled into the master's program, so I'm doing both at the same time. And I'm trying to fly through this master's program because I want to be done with school. But because it is a graduate degree plan, I'm only allowed to take so many classes at a time, even though I know I have the ability and the capability to do more. I can't. Like, the school will not let me. That is a circumstance out of my control. So instead of like getting all frustrated because I'm going to be in school for an extra year that I don't want to be in, I'm okay. Like, for a moment, I'm going to be honest, for a moment, I was a little frustrated when I got the email back and they were like, we're not going to approve you to take that many hours. I was frustrated. But Pastor Philip, as many of you know who he is, he was a good encouragement to me. So God, like, listen, I get it. I know that you want to get this thing done. He goes, but remember, you're in the master's program to actually learn something. And so by taking your time, you're going to be able to think on and dwell on these things that you're learning and really begin to apply them in your life. Plus, you're not going to be pulling out your hair as your third kid comes along. My wife's due in June with our daughter. And so we said, you're not going to be as busy with school, so you're going to be able to spend plenty of time with family and not get easily overwhelmed by how much school you have to do. I was like, oh, you're right. Like, so you're going to have those people in your life that are going to reveal some light into your journey. But and looking at our passage, it says, the sun will not strike you by day. And so that is one of those external circumstances that he cannot control, but knows that the Lord is his shelter. So the Lord is going to bring shade. The Lord is going to bring relief. So even when you're in a journey where there are circumstances that you cannot control, that is in the moment where our faith is tested. That is the moment to say, okay, Lord, am I going to allow this to control my attitude? Am I going to allow this external circumstance to control the way I view you or the way that I respond to people in my life? Or am I going to give you complete control of this? Or am I going to continue on this journey, fight through these external circumstances, and let it be maybe a trial that's going to bring me perseverance or endurance? It's all about perspective. Remember, whether the circumstances is self-inflicted or something that we can't control, doesn't mean God's not there. Doesn't mean God's not watching you, not protecting you, not bringing you relief. He still is. And then just real quick, this weird comment about the moon by night. Many of the commentaries talk about that as a superstitious fear of the moon's light, which is why the psalmist is still saying he needs protection then. A superstitious fear of the moon's light. We think to ourselves oftentimes that, well, we don't deal with those sort of things. We don't? Let me tell you what a superstitious fear looks like. That could be, Austin has this situation where he has the fever, then he has the seizure. A superstitious fear is now all of a sudden, I think that if my son gets worked up and plays with his little brother, that he's going to have a seizure. That's not the case. The doctor told us he's okay. There's nothing wrong with him. He's allowed to be a little boy. But I have that fear in my life, and I'm jumping to my own conclusions because I'm not trusting the Lord. So even though it's not technically superstitious by the definition that we might see here, how many times do we make up stories in our minds, right? How many times do we tell ourselves, like, I'm never going to get through this season? I would tell myself, I'm not going to make it to ministry. I'm never going to be able to be in that place. Maybe you're like, I'm never going to get to that career. I'm never going to be able to pursue that. I'm never going to find Mr. or Mrs. Right. I'm never going to XYZ, fill in the blank. We tell ourselves these things. Those are those superstitious fears. Those fears that are just like, okay, Lord, this clearly shows that I'm not trusting you. Let me encourage you, don't do that. Don't buy into the lies of the enemy. Instead, recognize whether they're real fears and real trials or things that the enemy is just putting into our minds. Let me tell you, regardless of which one it is, God is still protecting you. God is still providing you relief. God is still providing you a promise that he's got you taken care of. And as we end the last two verses, the Lord preserves his people. And again, we've said that before. We've used that word before. Preserves his people. The Lord will protect you from all harm. He will protect your life. The Lord will protect your coming and going both now and forever. And so I want to share this proverb with you. Proverb 3:5-6 is one of my favorite. It says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will direct your paths, or he will make your path straight. So as I've used my own life as an example, let me tell you, I finally got into ministry. And I started off as a youth pastor. Even though I thought I was called to be a worship pastor, I went and led worship at a small church in Broken Arrow. And I was doing that for a few months. And then the pastor came up to me and he said, you're young and your style of worship is different than ours because they're a very traditional church. And he said, but our kids love you and want to ask you to be our youth pastor, which is not something I ever thought I'd do. I was 20 when they asked me to do that. And so I prayed and for about 4 or 5 months before I gave him an answer. Finally gave him the answer and I said yes. So at 21, I became a youth pastor. And it was good. I loved it. I realized what my calling in ministry actually was. It wasn't worship like I thought all those years. It was actually the Lord preparing me for student ministry. So I did student ministry at that church for 2 years. And then as I was getting ready to be married to Ashley, due to some circumstances, we knew that God was calling us out of that church. And so my home church was looking for a worship pastor. Now, let me push pause real quick. Being that 17, 18-year-old kid in high school at the church that I grew up in my mind, thinking to myself, being the worship pastor here, that'd be making it, right? I was like, that's like the end goal. Well, now that end goal is getting a little bit real. So I put in my resume and I get the job. I become the worship pastor at my home church. Now, they had shrunk a little bit since I was in high school at that moment. This is about 3 or 4 years removed from high school. And so they had gotten smaller, 5 years. And they had gotten smaller, so they brought me on part-time. 6 months after I was there, the youth pastor resigned, and I became full-time at my home church doing youth and music. In my mind, man, I made it. This is it, right? This is the pinnacle of ministry. This is what I prayed for. This is what I was looking at. Like, this is it. I made it. How wrong was I? Because let me tell you, it's not at all what I thought it was going to be. It was tough because it was a tough place to serve. The structure of that church was not biblical, and there wasn't a big community for my wife and I. The next youngest couple, aside from me and Ashley, the next youngest couple was her childhood's best friend's parents. That was the next youngest couple at our church. So we had zero community at that church. We served there for 2 years, and then God called us out. And the next ministry job that I took was when Phil Dietz, he's our community pastor, many of you know him. Phil Dietz extended to me to be an intern here at Evergreen. Talk about a humbling season. I thought I made it, right? I thought, like, this is the pinnacle of my journey. This is what I've been working toward. God calls me out of that, and I get offered like an intern spot. And that's not to down interns. I have interns, and I love them dearly, all right? But I was like, what? Like, Lord, why are you, what? But he overwhelmingly said, Evergreen's where I'm calling you to. And so my wife and I prayed about it, and I was working insurance at the time, so I had a job. And so I told Phil, wherever you'd have me serve, we're going to do it. Well, Pastor Michael ends up bringing me on as the associate youth pastor. And 8 years later, I'm the student pastor here at Evergreen, which is a pretty cool church, if you don't know that already. And I never thought that being in a place like this, just filled with best friends and filled with such incredible community, I didn't even know this was possible. Like, this wasn't even on the map for me. When I was on my journey, this wasn't the end. I didn't even know this thing existed, right? Like, being in this sort of a season. Let me remind you, whatever journey you're in, he's got you. It says he's going to protect you coming and going, both now and forever. He knows what the end looks like for you of whatever journey you're on. And I promise you, when you're abiding in him and when you're trusting in him, it is way better than what anything in your imagination could come up with. Because that's what it was for me. This opportunity to serve in this church in the way that I am far exceeds anything that my feeble brain at the age of 18, 19, 20 years old could have ever come up with. I never thought this would even be an option. Don't limit God. Y'all, don't limit God. Whatever journey you're on, whatever you think that finish line is supposed to look like, don't put limits on God. Because what he's got for you, I promise, is so much sweeter than anything you could come up with in your own mind. So trust God in whatever season you're in. Trust God in whatever journey you're on. And in this moment, just take a deep breath and say, okay, Lord, you're in control. I gotta stop panicking. I gotta stop freaking out. Because I did, as you know, I did that multiple times. I'd panic, I'd freak out, I'd cry, and I just had to trust him.
Hey guys, this is Philip Jackson, pastor to young adults at Evergreen Baptist Church. I want to invite you to come to Reach. We meet every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. at Evergreen Church in South Tulsa, just east of Mingo on 111th Street. The mission of Reach Tulsa is to cultivate a young adult community that's defined by real transformation and a sincere pursuit of a godly life through training in biblical disciplines, personal development, and intentionally transitioning into independence as mature members of the body of Christ. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like and subscribe to our content. We're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Reach Young Adult Ministry is a part of Evergreen Baptist Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma. For more information and additional lessons, please visit our website, evergreenbc.org.